Okay, welcome to our Ready to Teach Week session. Can I just confirm that everyone can hear me okay?
Yes,
Yep,
thank you.
getting some nods. Thank you. Welcome to our session on interactive oral assessments, designing, implementing, and reflecting. My name is Emily. I'm a learning designer in the faculty of EIT, and joining me today is Chloe Salisbury from Bell and Alex Osika also from EIT. Okay, oh, So I'd just like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. Okay, so this is what we're doing today. Chloe and I, for the first half an hour till about 10:30, will take you through designing and implementing interactive oral assessments. And then at 10:30, Alex is going to facilitate an academic panel discussion where you'll hear from four academics and their experiences with interactive oral assessments. So that QR code in the corner there, use your phone or another browser to open up the Padlet there. So there's some guides and resources linked on that Padlet. So pretty much everything in our presentation today comes from those guides on interactive oral assessments. And also there's a section on the Padlet where you can submit questions for the panel. Please have that open ready for 10:30 so that you can submit a question and we can direct your questions to our panel. Okay, so let's dive into designing interactive oral assessments. So you probably have a bit of an idea of what interactive orals are, but basically they're unscripted two-way conversations between an assessor and students, guided by semi-structured questions. So they're an opportunity for students to articulate or demonstrate their understanding. And the nature of this assessment means that learners need to have a deep understanding of course concepts. They're also a really good way to ensure academic integrity because you're verifying a student's performance. So even though we know interactive orals can induce a bit of stress and anxiety in students, we have been receiving positive reports. So you can see there some student quotes there. This student's talking about how the interactive oral felt it built their confidence for work, for job interviews and meetings. And they also talked about how they find exams a bit challenging. We've also heard that students like the opportunity to articulate what they know, and in group work, they like that they can talk about what they contributed to the project and how they had impact. From staff, we've also heard that well-designed interactive orals means that marking is efficient and they get a sense of satisfaction watching students showcase what they know. So, as with any assessment, you first need to determine whether this type is appropriate, considering your course, your context, and your learning outcomes. So, you need to consider whether students will be able to evidence the achievement of the learning outcomes in an interactive oral. Also, need to think about whether you have available resourcing for interactive orals. But if you need help, there is support, so you can reach out to your faculty learning designers or your program conveners. So when designing your interactive oral, there's a few decisions that you need to make around the delivery mode, the task format, and the timing. So in-person interactive orals really are the preferred method because online interactive orals carry an academic integrity risk. So students could have notes, there could be another person in the room, and it's much easier to ensure academic integrity with an in-person interactive oral. Standalone interactive orals or orals based around an artifact. So an oral based around an artifact is often known as an oral defense. So students will have submitted an artifact such as a report, a design, or a project, whereas a standalone interactive oral means that you're just questioning students based on their knowledge. So if you are doing an oral defense, consider the workload of your teaching team because they'll need to be familiar with the artifact prior to the interactive oral. So skipping ahead to timing here, from the research that we've done, we've found that an interactive oral typically works best between 10 to 15 minutes. So this duration allows for meaningful responses without tiring students out. You could use shorter interactive orals of around 5 minutes. These could be useful as progress checks towards a final design, but they might not provide enough depth for detailed answers. You could also use a framing scenario for your oral, something that mimics a professional setting, and something that suits the context of your course. So we've got a few examples here, a design share or critique panel, a debrief, a panel discussion, a job interview. But you might just want to start with just a standard Q&A first, and then in later iterations, you might add in a framing scenario depending on how it goes. Oh, I'm stuck. There we go. So we've got a few examples of framing scenarios here. So this one from corporate law, in which it was a simulated workplace meeting with the student acting as the clerk and reporting to the assessor, who was the partner at a commercial law firm. Another framing scenario here was a simulated board meeting from gaming and casino management. So each student took the position of a stakeholder representing and defending their client's viewpoints. And there was a facilitator who prompted the group with targeted questions to keep the conversation going and keep them focused. And this framing scenario comes from education. Students developed and submitted a lesson plan with a rationale linked to the research and theory. And their interactive oral was a discussion with the assessor where they explained and justified their lesson plan and rationale. So, criteria and marking. So, when you're designing these, try to focus on assessing students on what they know and not on how well they present. So, my advice would be don't get caught up in assessing students on things like eye contact or how confident they seem, particularly because cultural differences mean that students will present differently. For example, in some cultures, eye contact is considered rude. So instead, focus on how well they can articulate their knowledge and make it clear to students on what they're being assessed on. So you might review the rubric and the marking criteria in class with them. Do some training with your marking team and really unpack what the criteria mean and what constitutes as good evidence. And it's also a good idea to normalize with both your teaching team and your students that it's okay for students to ask questions, to ask for questions to be restated or for clarification in the interactive oral. So question and prompt design. So again, linked on that Padlet that we've sent out, Alex has written a great guide on question and prompt design. So please have a look for some more details. But basically, when you're formulating questions for your interactive oral, you want to develop a bank of questions so that students aren't all receiving the same ones. And it's a good idea to start with your criteria and then formulate a main question that's aligned to that criterion. And then you can develop follow-up questions. So we have an example here of like the rubric criteria with some example questions on the slide there. You also want to use a range of questions depending on the information that you need from your learners. For example, you could ask questions getting your learners to elaborate more, or perhaps if they get off track, you might need to use redirecting questions. So again, do some training with your assessing team to ensure that they're comfortable with the different types of questioning. But you want to remember that you're on the same team as the student. So yes, you're using questioning and prompting to ascertain what they know, but you also are using it to get a full answer from the student. You could also use active listening skills here, such as things like nodding or smiling or saying that's interesting. Just engage with them as you would in a professional conversation. This might help put students more at ease. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Chloe now, who's going to take us through marking and moderation.
Thanks so much, Emily. So next we're going to touch on marking and moderation. So your marking and your moderation should really be beyond what your actual assessment period is. So starting with marker training to ensure that all markers working under the understand the assessment task, the marking rubric, and also how to perform their role during the oral assessment. So I'll touch a little bit more on this in the next slide. Then, depending on how long your assessment might go for, the type of assessment, having check-ins throughout the marking process as well. These don't need to be long formal meetings. They might just be a short conversation or sending an email back and forth just to check or clarify something that's happened in one. So that's a good kind of normalization of practice to have during that period. And then during this process, really having a discussion about what should the markers be talking about in this process. So is it talking about reviewing fails, looking at different ends of the spectrum to see what HDs versus near fails. So really looking at kind of that variation. So have a discussion about what's kind of relevant to go through in your assessment piece. And then if you're able, you can use a double marking strategy where two markers are present for the interactive oral. And you might specifically use this for the first couple of assessments to ensure that consistency and confidence in the markers, and just make sure you're kind of communicating to the students that this is happening as well. So to give you a bit more guidance on the initial marker training, so these are some key kind of areas you should discuss with your marker. So talking about what an interactive oral is, if they're not familiar with it, why you're using it, because that'll help them communicate to the students about the reasoning during class, the logistics and the scheduling, having a practice marking activity, and then also discussing how to support students through the process. So in terms of that kind of practice marking, here's an example of a practice session that could be used to get markers familiar with their role and the marking rubric. And you really want this to kind of happen before and be a collaborative opportunity to figure out what's working and what might not be before you actually get into the interactive orals. And so this is a quote from Jason Lodge about running interactive oral assessments in the teaching discipline. And we often find that when people switch to this type of assessments, they're a bit concerned that they won't be able to distinguish the quality between students in these types of assessment. And this is generally not the case. As you can see here, though you do need to be aware if you don't have experienced markers that have that expertise.
Sorry, I'm very sorry, Chloe, to interrupt, but the slides are not changing. So I'm Deirdre
Ooh.
Mickelson, and I've put it in the chat, and I'm seeing that a lot of people are also responding that they're having the same issue. We're still stuck at slide 21. So can we just
Oh,
please have a
apologies.
little bit of a
Of
recap? That'd be
course.
great. Thank you so very
Of
much, and
course.
sorry to have disrupted you.
No, that's okay. Is that showing up for you
Apologies.
now?
Thank you so
Yep.
much. Yes, that's beautiful.
No,
Thank you
that's
very
okay.
much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.
So yes, this is going back to the marking and moderation. So having that marker training for them, then having the check-ins throughout that process, and deciding what you're going to review with the markers, and then having that double marking strategy at the start, if possible. This is an outline of the marker training, so the key kind of concepts you should be addressing, and you might have more than this, you might have less than this as you go through, and then that example marker practice as well. So this is just an example of 2 different parts that you could do, but obviously there's a bit of flexibility in the way in which you can do that. This is the quote that I mentioned about Jason Lodge mentioned in one of his resources after running interactive role assessments. So really that focus on within about the 2 minutes of starting each conversation, they knew where the students were at, and they were really able to distinguish between the different levels of the students. And so just being considerate of newer markers or people that might be earlier in their career not have the same expertise, to make sure you have that appropriate marker training at the start to make sure they feel confident in doing this as well. So this one just kind of shows a little bit about options for a feedback strategy. So during the semester, you should have opportunities to give formative feedback. This might be through learning activities in the classroom, and also it might be group feedback or group reflections where peers can do activities together. Then you'll also have your summative feedback afterwards, and you can think about the mode in which you might do that and how in which you might give feedback. So some people choose to give feedback directly after running the interactive oral, where others might record and send it later, along with the marking rubric. So have a think about what's going to suit best in that. I think there often has been feedback that giving students directly afterwards really allows you to engage in a feedback conversation, and students get a lot of learning from that process as well. So these are some examples of learning activities and scaffolding you could do within the classroom. I'm not going to talk through each of them. As mentioned, the slides are up on the Padlet and you can have a look through them as well. But just giving a bit of an example of different disciplines and the type of activities you might do to prepare students for their interactive role assessment. Then a kind of example of practice is to give students a mock example of what an interactive assessment might look like. So these are just screenshots of a video to kind of show what it might look like. There's also some links to examples on the Padlet of actual interactive oral assessments that you can have a look at in your own time. And so this really helps the student understand what's kind of going to be expected of them, what might be a good answer, what might be a poor answer. And you can really talk about that with the students so they understand those expectations, just like you would with other types of assessment pieces. If you don't have the time or the resources available to do this sort of video, you can also think about even just simple things like taking a photo of the room that it might be in, so the students kind of understand the space and where they're going to be sitting, can help ease a little bit of anxiety for some students. So to summarize our designing IOAs section, these are some of the key areas that we addressed and we recommend you kind of work through when you're thinking about this assessment, and the majority of them apply to different types of assessment as well. So next we're going to move on to implementing IOAs. And so I know this is often a key kind of question that comes up, is like, how do we actually do it? How do we enact this? So we're just going to briefly talk through guidance on a few key areas. So in terms of scheduling, I won't go through each of these points, but they're there for your reference. And the key kind of options generally when scheduling is Blackboard Ultra groups or Microsoft Teams bookings. Your faculty might have a preference between the two. So just talk to your learning design team if they do have a preference, and they can help guide you in how to do that. But there's some kind of pros and cons for each of them. And same with recording. There's the option to record into Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or use a manual device, and you can have a think about, based on the numbers that you have and the type of assessment that you have, what's going to work with that. When an oral or a practical assessment is worth 20% or more, that does need to be recorded. And it depends on what you're recording. If it's just the verbal that's relevant, you can just microphone record it. But if the visual's required as well, then you need to make sure you're recording that, depending what your grading rubric is. So just a few kind of quick tips in terms of recording. So the first thing is to make sure you capture the student's identity. So ask them to show you your student ID card to the camera and also verbalize their name and student number. Depending on what recording you're using, this can also automatically create like a transcript, like if you're using Teams or Zooms, and that can help you search for students a little bit easier if necessary, and just good for record keeping. Designing a name convention for the file storage. So there's an example here that you might use your course code, student number, and then the assessment title. But this can really save you in the long run if you think about these kind of little changes at the start. And then also making sure you store your files securely. So just like all assessment, it needs to be stored for at least 1 year following grade release, and try to keep that on like the course Echo 360 to avoid your personal storage, which no one else can access if you happen to leave. So in terms of recording, you really need to, according to policy, you need to ensure students are aware that the assessment is going to be recorded, and also good practice to communicate that to them. So this is an example how you can put it on the course profile text, the assessment task sheet, and also saying to them at the time of the interactive oral assessment. And so this is just an example. You can adjust it to suit your needs, but just highlighting that it is important to communicate to the students that it's going to be recorded. So the other key thing in terms of really having that inclusive design is communication to students. And again, this is for all assessment pieces, but to focus on this one is really make sure you have transparent and clear task requirements. And that can be through in-class activities, the task sheet and the rubric, and also the course profile, so the students really understand what it is that's expected of them. Having detailed information on the logistics, so just making sure that they're not stressing about where they have to go and where they have to show up and how they have to schedule and session it, and they can actually do those things simply with clear communication, and they can actually focus on the study and the content that they need to learn. And then make sure you've got diverse communication methods. So always putting things on Blackboard, the course profile, speaking things in class, and really allowing some sort of opportunity for students to ask questions about their assessment pieces. So next we're going to move on to the reflecting on interactive oral assessments. And so I'm going to be passing over to Alex, who's going to speak with a few wonderful guests we have to share their experiences. So I'll pass over to Alex now.
Perfect. Thank you, Chloe. So hi everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a learning designer with Engineering, Architecture and Information Technology, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel and introducing our wonderful panelists. So I'll ask that they, if they haven't already, put their video on, and I'll ask Chloe to pin them so that they come up on the screen. And we have some planned questions for our panel, and we have audience questions as well. So if you would like to submit a question for our panel, please do by adding it onto the Padlet, and then I'll make sure that that gets asked as we go. So to introduce everybody, first up, we have Dr. Hima Haridevan from the School of Chemical Engineering. She's part of the ENG 7902 teaching team. And in ENG 7902, the postgraduate students come from any engineering discipline to develop skills and understanding to prepare for some what we call non-engineering factors that influence delivery and translation of engineering technologies and projects. In her IOA, the students are working in teams throughout the semester, and they pitch and develop engineering solutions, and that culminates in that final assessment where students perform a pre-seed or feasibility project pitch to a group of investors asking for between $500 and $1 million in that IOA assessment. So welcome, Hima. We also have Associate Professor Mashita Glencross joining us from the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science as the course coordinator for DECO 3801. This is a studio-based capstone design projects course where interdisciplinary teams design and implement a significant software IT prototype in a practice-based setting. It's very much a combination of everything the students have been studying. They work individually and in groups over the entire semester to develop a code-based project according to a specific project brief and with industry level project deadlines. In this course, the teaching team conducts 2 interim code demonstration interactive oral assessments during the semester, where the final year software engineering, information technology, and computer science students need to demonstrate and explain their individual contributions to their team project. So welcome, Mishuda. Joining us also is Associate Professor David Lang from the School of Civil Engineering, coordinating multiple courses in the fire safety engineering field of study. These courses are run externally and cater to civil engineers who want to upskill in fire safety. In the course that we're talking about today, specifically Fire 7680, students are learning skills and knowledge to develop an explicit fire safety strategy. As a final assessment piece, the students complete individual interviews with the teaching team in a style that's akin to an oral exam, and it also mimics professional settings and professional contexts where students are asked to explain their reasoning and their understanding of different concepts. So welcome, David. Joining us from the UQ Business School is Dr. Andrew Scott. Andrew coordinates MGTS 7610, where students learn how to engage and interact with people persuasively within business contexts. And Andrew's assessment piece comes in 2 parts. In part A, the students produce a written artifact, which is a proposal to recommend a solution to a particular business issue. And then this is followed up in part B as an interactive oral assessment where the students then discuss their proposal with the teaching team and how it would be adapted in the context of unforeseen circumstances, like a crisis scenario. So thank you for joining us, Andrew, and welcome to all of our panelists. So to start off, I'm going to ask everybody to reflect on why it is that they chose to do an interactive oral assessment for their course. So I'll start with you, Hima.
Hi, everyone. We chose interactive oral exams because our course is not just about technical content. We have got engineers with different disciplines in our course, postgraduate students. So they have got the technical skill at that point. And our objectives of the course is to know what you're designing and design for somebody who needs it. And this is the skill which we want to teach them. So it means that there is a lot of communication involved. The students are expected to work in a team, and to assess these qualities, an interactive oral exam is the best. And to add to that, it's more of that an interactive exam helps the students to resonate and reason with us. This is very much important because unlike technical content, when we're giving them context and asking them to develop something which people need, that means that there's no direct right solution. It's more of an open-ended question, and they have to adapt. And this is where interactive oral exams can actually help, and they can respond to our questions, and it's more of a dialogue. That's why we think that this is the best system for us.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Hima. And Mishuda, can you tell us more about why you chose to do an interactive oral assessment for your course?
Yeah, I was actually quite nervous about actually doing an interactive oral assessment for the course because of the number of students on the course. But I did kind of lean into it because of the needs with the proliferation of AI, it was really important for students to be able to demonstrate really what they've individually done on their project and their understanding of what the work that they've done on their project. So interactive oral assessment gave us an opportunity to tease out a little bit of that and try and get a sense of how to scale the grade relative to the level of understanding displayed of their contribution to the project across the team. Students are generally very unhappy if they just get a team grade when there's a large number of people working in a team and different levels of contribution to the project. So the opportunity to do a little bit interactive oral assessment was also just to get students to be able to demonstrate and showcase their contributions, and that actually does lead them to feel a bit more satisfied that their contributions are being recognised and acknowledged as well.
Fantastic. And there were some common threads there with what Huma was saying about the students really being able to show their reasoning and understanding throughout that. Yeah. Thanks, Mashida. David, what about for your course? Why did you decide to do an IOA?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, so actually, Fire 7680 is one of the courses that is part of Master of Engineering Science in the field of study of fire safety engineering. We offer that program as an external program only. So basically the IOAs are, I guess, a practical solution to a problem around about how we do identity verified assessment in each of the courses. So it's not just Fire 7680, it's also the other 5 courses in the fire safety engineering program which we deliver, in which we use some form of interactive oral assessment. We find that the oral assessments that we do also, because this is a master's program, and as Alex said, this is intended to support engineers who are already practicing to upskill towards fire safety engineering. It also helps to mimic, for example, a professional setting, challenges their ability to communicate complex technical concepts orally as well, such as they might have to do in that professional environment.
Great. Thank you, David. And Andrew, what about you?
Hi, everyone. Well, 3 main reasons we chose it. Firstly, it was identified in student feedback. They wanted more speaking on the course. So the interactive oral assessment was a way of bringing that in and then preparing for that in the tutorials, also brought sort of speaking into those as well. Secondly, and this was mentioned earlier, we were keen not only to assess their performance, but to try and gauge their underlying understanding. So we can look at the artifact, and then when we ask them about it, we're trying to gauge how much they've understood. And finally, I thought it was an effective way to finish a course on communication, as opposed to an end of course exam where they sit and they write their responses. So those were the 3 reasons we chose it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. And yeah, as I listen to all of you, then there are those common threads coming through where the students are really appreciating being able to communicate and show their individual understanding. And a number of you talked about mimicking professional settings. And I imagine the students enjoy being able to show their skills within that, and it helps them prepare for the future. And the security aspect as well came in through a number of your answers. Coming up on the Padlet, David, there's a question specifically for you here. Because all of your IOAs are run on Zoom because your courses are external, have you had any issues with academic integrity in the way that you've conducted your IOAs?
That's an excellent question, and thanks for asking it, actually. So I think one of the comments that came up, or it was made in the presentation earlier as well, was around about challenges with IVA and integrity with the oral assessments. One of the things that we do to manage that is actually through the design of the questions. So when we started doing this probably 4 or 5 years ago, I can't remember exactly when, every question that we were asking was verbal. So we had written questions which we asked the students, and I guess as prompts to start a conversation with them. As I guess concerns around a bit of integrity with that mode of assessment have increased, we've transitioned to combining that with also questions which are based on, for example, an image prompt or a video prompt. We're also we have a bank of questions which we use to ask the students as well. So students are not getting asked exactly the same set of questions. The questions are open-ended so that there's a set amount of time that we allocate to each question in the assessment. We just try and prompt the student to use that time. And ultimately what we're looking for is, I guess, a fluent and fluid conversation around about that topic. that we're asking the student about. We're not asking them to hit particular points, and it allows us to be quite dynamic as well in terms of the assessment of possibly responding to how easily the student is finding it to answer that question. We've also found that, and I guess that this is probably going to be the case for many of the subjects that people are teaching here, we've also found that generative artificial intelligence is really terrible at fire safety engineering.
Fantastic. And David, you talked about whether you ask the questions and how you prompt the students. And Mashuda, I know you ask open-ended questions in your class as well. Can you tell us about how you design questions for your interactive oral assessments?
So we had a large number of projects that were all quite distinct, and so designing questions was a bit of a kind of stepped approach in terms of setting up a kind of overall scaffolding structure of the conversation, a bit like a semi-structured interview. But then the teaching team also collaborated to create a bit of a question bank for clusters of projects that were the same, because we had multiple teams doing the same project, but with different teaching team members involved in working with them week by week to assess their progress. And so those teaching team members that were actually looking after and supporting students doing specific projects were able to develop a little bit of a question bank of ideas. But the key benefit of the approach was that because the markers were already familiar with the projects in terms of their weekly engagement with the teams, they were able to, within a framework of question areas to probe on, customize according to what the particular project was.
Excellent. And Andrew and Hema, do you want to add anything here about how you design your questions and interact with students in your assessment that's different or the same?
It's quite similar to what Mashuda has mentioned. However, we have got a multidisciplinary course. At the same time, we have our students are also from different disciplines in engineering. So our teaching team is also designed to have a lot of different kinds of expertise. So what we do is that we try to allocate different sections of the rubric to a particular member of the panel in the teaching team, and they can ask certain relevant questions with respect to their expertise to the students in the exam. So that's how we do it, but mostly everything else is quite similar to what Mashuda mentioned.
Excellent. Andrew, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, again, we're similar. I like the idea of this semi-structured interview. So we have open questions. In the protocol for the markers, we script in sort of overview of the different parts and the transitions as they move through. So that's consistent across them. And then we have sample prompts depending on what they've written about in the proposal. And then I've got some follow-up prompts, a variety of those. So there's not a single question that's being asked that students could then share or go to AI and get sort of a fixed response from. And then at the end, some tips for examiners as well when managing it. So sort of open questions and dependent on the student's answers. With stronger responses, I'm able to ask one question and the student runs with it and goes into great depth. And for other students, when it's a shorter answer, you can then prompt them a little bit more to find out the extent of their knowledge and understanding.
Excellent. And in all of these assessments, as some of you mentioned earlier, and we've had a question come up on the Padlet, the students are understandably anxious that they're going to be asked all of these questions. They are sometimes unknown, sometimes planned, sometimes prompts, and it can be quite daunting. And so I'd like to ask a question around how do you handle student anxiety and like navigate and account for um, those student experiences of anxiety and supporting them in how they can perform best in that assessment. And then we'll come to a question about SAPs after that. So I'll hand over to Mashuda for this one first.
So that's an interesting question because we were quite worried about potential for anxiety, especially with a large cohort. And so we took a two-pronged approach in the sense that we had a low stakes initial go where students were not really going to lose much if they didn't manage to do well in the assessment. It was weighted at about 3%. It was not going to make any difference to their overall grade. We also promised them that if they improved in the second interactive oral assessment demonstration, we would basically kind of weight more heavily towards the second oral assessment, so they had the opportunity to demonstrate that they would improve their presentation. So it removed the anxiety from the first go. And then secondly, we actually did produce, it was a low production demonstration video where myself and the other course coordinator involved in the course sat down and did an interview mimicking a not a very good oral interactive presentation. It was keeping in mind a software project demonstration. So, we screen shared and had them pull up code and things like that and talk through what they were doing and pull up, kind of evidence of designs that they'd done for user interfaces and things like that. And then we replicated the same. Again, it was quite low production, so but we replicated the same with a good version. We actually did show both versions before the first assessment, first go, in class, and go over what was good about the good version and what was not good about the version where the student wasn't able to evidence their work. We also showed the videos in our teaching team meeting in advance as well to help prep all of the staff on, what we're really looking for in terms of an effective demonstration and evidence base for students' work. So, sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but it was a two-stage process.
Yeah, and the videos that you mentioned is something that we put in our guide as well. We've heard from a lot of places, so it's great to hear that it's well received by the students and also by the teaching team. But then extending your answer a little bit, how do you manage the student access plans that come through in your course for the IOA?
Yeah, so we actually didn't have many student access plans come through for the IOA last semester, but we were going to do a smaller group setting if students needed a smaller group setting for an interactive demo. The demo, because it's not really necessarily focusing on kind of effective articulation verbally of how a person's project works. There are ways in which a person can demonstrate that by pulling up things and potentially also even typing in a chat what their thoughts are, if they find it difficult to kind of if they've got a fear of speaking publicly or anything like that. All of the interviews were conducted in a bit of a one-on-one setting anyway, even though it was in a busy large space. They weren't public speaking type assessments, and so it removed a bit of that barrier for interactive oral assessments because they were one-on-one.
Yeah. And Andrew, you also run one-on-one as well. Have you found any challenges with student anxiety or student access plans in your course?
Not so far with student access plans. They are one-to-one and they are online. So again, the open questions means that there's not a single correct answer that we're looking for. I think that can reassure students. We run parallel speaking tasks, so similar tasks, practicing what they need to do in the tutorials. And the other couple of things we managed the bookings through Microsoft Bookings, which was new to everyone. So we put a video guide together and put that on Blackboard so students could see how that worked. And we worked with the embedded language support officer, Andrew Sankey, in the business school. He put together an AI bot interview coach, which gave them the types of questions we were going to answer, and they had an opportunity to practice their responses. I think last semester that was written, and I think this semester he's going to try and do a spoken version, but that means they can practice and get sort of comfortable and familiar with what's going on there. And in the interview protocol, I included things like smile. So right at the start, when the marker's going through, it's got smile, introduce yourself. So the marker, this was the first time they were running it last semester, were probably a little bit worried and anxious too. So just to make sure they're relaxed and smiling and set a sort of a relaxed tone for the interview, I think is important. So there's a few reminders through the protocol for the markers to do that. And I think once the interview gets going, the students seem to enjoy the opportunity they have to talk about, their work and what they've learned. So the anxiety perhaps is in the build up, but during the interviews, I didn't hear of any issues, during the interviews themselves.
Yeah, excellent. And David, I'm keen to hear your thoughts as well, because when we spoke about how you run it, you mentioned that you kind of set the students at ease to begin with. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Actually, I mean, it's very similar to a lot of the other answers that you've already heard. A couple of other points, though. So I think one thing which we stress in all of the courses that we use this in the FIRE program here is that one of the best opportunities to practice the oral discussions, the type of discussions they're going to have in these assessments, is actually to engage positively and participate very actively in tutorial sessions and the synchronous learning activities which we've got. So we do stress that all the way through the year. We do still find, of course, that students come into the assessments and they are quite nervous. And to get around that, we start off the assessment, the actual interview, with kind of a bit of an informal chat about how they're feeling. We're very direct and ask them if they're nervous, and try and do what we can just to alleviate those nerves. In particular, I think as somebody else said, these are not closed questions, they're open-ended questions. There are more than one ways to structure a response to what we're asking, and so we stress that to the students and just ask them not to worry about it. We're not looking for them to hit particular points or tell us a specific thing or use a specific word or whatever. We're just trying to understand where the extent of their understanding is, and give them the opportunity to communicate that. So yeah, we do really what we can. Yeah, the other thing which has come up as well is we do use recorded interviews. So we use the course tutors as well, and we do interviews with those and share them on the Blackboard site so that students who are going to go through the IOA process have an opportunity to see what that looks like. They also have experience by the time they've done one of our oral assessments, because we use it in all 6 of our courses. They've done these before.
Yeah, thanks, David. And Hima, I'm going to pass it on to you. I've deliberately left you to last because I know your setting is very different, with your panel markers and the students presenting in a group. How do you manage student anxiety for the way that they're presented in groups and with the panel?
By the time we do our final exam of doing the bigger pitch, we don't have much of the situation because we have already put them through a series of small activities and other exams. For example, we have got an elevator pitch, which we do in the beginning of the semester, which is just 3 minutes. And the most confident person in the group comes and talks about it, while the others are more into the discussion part of the exam. So that's one. And then they have to go and interview people all around the campus. And in Australia, these are students who have never spoken to Australians mostly, because this is a cohort which is 99% international students. So that itself is a big part for them. And that's probably the biggest anxiety driven thing in the course rather than the exam. So by the time they come to the exam, after going through this series of activities, they're mostly fine. I understand that this is probably not the answer you're looking for, but we don't see that much anxiety when it comes to the oral exams because they have gone through that series of things in the course.
Yeah, and I just agree. I think it's a good thing to hear because I know a lot of academics, when they want to start an IOA, they feel nervous about the students being very nervous and how to handle those situations. So I think it's great to hear from all of you that that effect is really minimal. But it also does come with, as a lot of you are saying, you do a lot of preparation with your teaching team, with creating different resources to support students, encouraging them in their tutorials throughout the semester, which leads me to a question on challenges in time and logistics and scheduling. We've had a few come on the Padlet. How do you manage the extra workload that comes with IOAs? And I'll stay with you, Hema, to answer this one first.
This is a big thing for us because the scale of 140 students, the number of rooms in UQ, that has been always a challenge to accommodate that much number of students. And our teams are roughly 5 students per team. And that means that we have mostly every year 20 to 25 teams. And this means that if we do an exam of 10 minutes or let's say 8 minutes and 4 minutes extra for questionnaire, that itself means that we have to cut the students off, and that has to be strict. And we find it difficult. The students find it difficult. We do get that feedback that this is probably not the best thing, but we don't have a choice. We try to explain to them that this is an issue with time management and with the rooms, because we cannot afford to go beyond that, given that the rooms are not available for longer times. What we try to do to mitigate this is that first thing is that we arrange everything, the bookings, make sure that we get the slides beforehand, set the order, have the questions, give the bit of script to them early on. But that's probably the best way we can handle that. Other things which we do, we try to explain more in terms of that this is a skill. It's not just a limitation, and it gives fairness to the whole team, as in every team gets the same opportunity to present. And that's one way we explain to the students and give them a bit more confidence. That's the best thing we could do. Unfortunately, the time and the availability of room makes it very hard for us.
Yeah, and Mashuda, you have a very large course as well. How do you manage the challenges with time, logistics, and resourcing?
Yeah, we had to do a significant amount of planning, and my co-coordinator put a mammoth amount of work into actually doing scheduling in 3 bands, because we had a 4-hour session booked studio in flat floor rooms in Mod West, and so we basically chunked that up into 3 segments, and we had a set of teams scheduled to come in for their individual interviews in different sets of teams coming in different chunks. We had to make space available for people to wait. So next in line, waiting in the space for each set of interviews. Ask students to join the Teams meeting in advance at specific set times according to their schedule with their marker. And then, their marker would admit them when their marker was ready, but they would go to a table where their marker was sitting as well with their device. but joined to the Teams meeting so that they were able to screen share and show specific code artifacts that they were talking through, or any kind of research work that they'd done, or any design work they'd done, any prototype stuff that they've got working. But it was a major effort in terms of planning the logistics in advance. Also, we had to accommodate students that couldn't make a certain time slot where we've scheduled, move them to a different time slot and swap them with other teams and things. So there was we released a schedule about 24 hours in advance and gave students the opportunity to ask for swaps, and did the best we could to manage all of that.
Yeah, so it's quite a front-loaded process.
Yeah.
And Andrew, you talked a bit about this in one of your early answers as well, about using Microsoft Bookings to help with the scheduling. What else is challenging with a large cohort of 534 students?
So we tried to take a flexible approach to the scheduling. And in terms of planning and preparation, we started a semester before. So that's what we did, and that seemed to work well. So the previous semester 1 last year, we started talking to learning designers and the business school examinations team to see how this would fit and the things to consider, which sort of then, to a degree, took the stress out of it because we had time to plan and prepare. We use Microsoft Bookings, and when you book with that, you can schedule a Teams call, and it does it all automatically. So that saves the step of having then to create a Zoom link or a Zoom meeting and that sort of thing. So that was good. Of course, we and the tutors had to learn how to use Microsoft Bookings, which was a bit of extra work. And it appears that everyone on the team prefers Zoom to Teams. So that was another sort of compromise. So going forward, I'll talk to them and we'll review that. We had the interactive oral assessments during the 2-week exam period. So that gave a bit of flexibility in that the artifact, the written proposal, was submitted at the end of week 13. So the markers could mark that during the revision week, or they could mark it just before the interview. So that gave the markers a bit of flexibility with the marking load. And in terms of organizing the time, that was dependent on tutor availability and student availability. So in the exam week, obviously the students had other exams they had to go to, so they had to make sure they selected a time when they didn't have another commitment. And it obviously had to fit in a time when the markers were available. So the online delivery or the online interview worked well. It would have been much more difficult if we'd had a particular room at a particular time. That would have made it much more challenging.
So what I'm hearing as a common theme is many people drawing on the scheduled class time that you already have to conduct those IOAs, and if not, then kind of leading into that exam scheduling. And David, I know yours happened during the exam time. What kind of challenges have you had with your course? You have less students, but in our past conversations, I know there was a lot of challenge in setting up these IOAs for your cohort.
So we need to share. I'll start at the beginning, sorry. So we fix the schedule. So it sounds like the majority of the other people on the panel are offering the student sessions to sign up to. We fix a schedule in advance, and we share that with the students a few weeks before the end of semester. And we've never had any problems with that. We never had any students who are not able to attend that. We always leave 1 or 2 slots kind of vacant in case somebody does need to shift, but we've never had any issues at all with that. When we fixed the schedule, which is obviously, it's again, because there are so many courses, we coordinate between the courses that are running the IOAs. So we'll have 3 courses which are doing these all at the end of semester. We coordinate that schedule across all 3 of the courses. With the 3 academics who are coordinating those courses, we'll share those schedules with the school administration team, who will look for clashes with any scheduled exams. we only have come across that in one of our courses, and then we're able to move students around to manage those clashes before we share the schedule for that. Yeah, sorry, does that answer the question?
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you,
cool.
David.
Thank you.
And what all of you are talking about as well is working with really diverse and large teaching teams as well, and that involves a lot of training. So I'll stay with you on this one, David, to kick us off. How do you prepare your teaching team so that you're all on the same page throughout the entire process?
Yeah, so it's also kind of an ongoing thing during the process, is making sure we're still on the same page. So we have 3 different formats that we use for the oral assessments, depending on the needs of the particular course. So in 3 of the courses, we use an interview style assessment. In 2 of the courses, we use a presentation followed by Q&A. And in one of the courses, we have multiple oral assessments, which are actually distributed throughout the semester. Because of that consistency, everybody knows what to expect. We have a common design and a common structure for the oral assessments. We discuss them. We have meetings throughout the semester to discuss the type of questions and the format of questions that we're going to be asking. And then I guess most importantly, we maintain very good communication during the oral assessments between the people who are leading the interviews, and it allows us to discuss comments or issues which are coming up with individual students as well. If there are any surprising outcomes, and to identify when there's going to be a need to go back and possibly have somebody else look at the marks which are being given after the oral assessment.
Yeah, fantastic. And Hima, I know you and your course team do something similar. Can you talk us through what you do for yours?
We take special care because our exams are heavily dependent on the examiner's judgment. We try to train the tutors from the beginning itself, because we've got an elevator pitch and then we have got a series of interviews. The tutors need to keep on track with the teams from the beginning to the end. Otherwise, sometimes we do get designs for nuclear power plants for 1 million money, or sometimes we get very small projects which do not fit into the criteria itself. So that means that the tutors have to be trained on the criteria of the project itself rather than on the assessment. So we start from there. We try to go along with them, with the tutors. If there's a new tutor, especially, that becomes very challenging for us. We do have meetings before every assessment, and the series of activities we have before the final oral exam also acts as a drill for the tutors as well as the students. So that means that the tutors start synchronizing amongst themselves, and they have got harmony in marking. We also have got pre-recorded videos from last year for each of these sessions and activities. That means the tutors can go and watch, see the marks. We do mock marking sessions with the tutors before each assessment, and all the teaching team, including the course coordinator and the lecturers, join the tutors for marking. That means that everybody gets together after each assessment to moderate excessively. And that's how we manage to get that consistency. Otherwise, it becomes difficult given that we have a lot of open-ended questions and answers.
Yeah. Yes, I can imagine with so many different markers and new tutors coming on as well, it's quite a challenging process. And Mashuda, you could perhaps speak more to that as well in your context. You have the largest team of all of our panelists. How do you train with 31 markers?
So actually quite a lot of similar strategies to what Hima mentioned, in the sense that we put a lot of effort into training our teaching team. We had a fantastic team of casual academics involved in the course, as well as a good set of really continuing academics as well. So we put a lot of effort into a lot of the tutor training, with weekly meetings of 2 hours each week with the whole teaching team, to help basically work through, right, what are we doing for the next week? How do we, what assessments coming up? What do we need to do? If we had specific assessment coming up, we would go through the assessment task sheets, criteria, explain what we were looking for, make sure that everybody was kind of on the same page in terms of what we were looking for. And then we would also follow up for the interactive oral assessments, follow up with a moderation meeting afterwards as well to calibrate everybody and make sure that everybody was on the same page in terms of like assessing against the criteria. For the oral assessments, we also any written assessments, anything like that, we did collaborative marking initially to make sure that we were all calibrated in terms of looking at how to match the criteria. For the more substantive interactive oral assessment, myself and other course academics sat in on half of all of the interactive individual demos, kind of to make sure that we did a good sampling of all of the interactive oral assessment demos from with each casual academic. So that also helped to make sure that we were all kind of on the same page in terms of the same kind of criteria. And then last but not least, we also had a course-wide moderation meeting where we looked at anything where there was any ambiguity, looking at things where people were close to grade boundaries, where they were failing, and just kind of overall picture of what the kind of marking process was going like, and whether or not we needed to even bring in a third marker to validate some of the marking that we'd done.
And Andrew, do you do something similar with your marking team?
Yeah, similar to what Hema and Mashuda were saying. We're very fortunate that we've got some experienced tutors who've been teaching on the course for many years. The criteria for the interactive oral assessment, some of them apply to the previous assessments as well. And so the markers are familiar from the earlier assessments they've marked on what they mean and what we're looking for and how they're applied. There was a question on the Padlet from Yvonne about the crisis situation. Was it announced, or are there a range of crises? So one way we account for that is a little bit in the task, and David mentioned this earlier. So in terms of designing his task, so for our proposal, the students choose a company from the Fortune 500 right in week 1, and that's their case study company all the way through the course. And they read about particular issues from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and they pick one of these and their proposals based on that. So everyone potentially has a different company, a different issue. So we can't and we don't have an announced specific question. It'll depend a little bit on their company and the issue they've decided to talk about. So as an appendix for the rubric, I've sort of put these in with some ideas of potential crisis situations for the tutors to explore. So once they've read the proposal, they could go to that list, they could think, okay, what's going to work? But it'll always depend a little bit on how the interview unfolds and the students' responses. So talking about that explicitly in the meeting, before the assessment, I think was helpful for the students and helped to make sure that it was approached consistently.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. And staying on the topic of marking, there's another question on the Padlet that's looking to tease out what constitutes a pass and fail in interactive oral assessment. And for those of you where it's more than just a pass-fail component, then how do you distinguish between grades for the marking criteria that you do have? So I'm going to leave it open to whoever wants to answer that one first. No one? Do I need to pick someone?
I might volunteer and answer, I guess, Alex.
Thanks.
So we have a marking rubric that we use. We we'll mark the students. We actually use a 5-point scale. We don't think that it's fair to try and go any finer than that in an oral assessment. So we try and keep it relatively coarse and within that 5-point scale. I guess I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here, not going down to I guess a fraction of less than half within that 5-point scale for each of the questions. But actually what we find with that approach is that within normally the first 4 or 5 minutes of an interview, we've got a pretty good idea of what the final mark is going to be. And we spend the rest of the time that we have available with the student just trying to, I guess, convince ourselves that it could be a little bit higher, trying to push the student a little bit beyond where we think that the level sits at the start. Because we got multiple questions as well, we do, I guess, have quite a good differentiation between students who perform well in different parts of the assessment as well. But yeah, I guess, like I said, we try and keep it relatively coarse.
Thanks, David.
I think
Rashida.
like David, we basically mark on a we actually marked on a 3-point scale. So like meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, not meeting expectations, and those were just mapped to the percentage weightings. So there's a fair amount of wriggle room in terms of the judgment, but it is actually very easy within a few minutes to really tell whether or not a student knows their work and can demonstrate their work. So basically getting to the exceeding expectations is a kind of easy judgment to make. And also the not meeting expectations is also a relatively easy judgment to make, because students need to really be, struggling with demonstrating any kind of knowledge of their project to be in that bucket. So it's actually not very difficult in the sense that if you're trying to go more granular, it can definitely be harder. Like, is somebody a high distinction versus a distinction? But if we're just trying to put them into 3 bands, I think it's easier.
I can add to that. We have got, unlike the other courses, which was having the individual assessments, we've got the team one. So that's a bit more tricky. The marks assigned for the team is not what the student gets. The peer assessment factor is what controls the pass and the fail in courses like ours. We use the buddy check system, and that works quite nice. And buddy check itself is a great software which lights up with different kind of things like tension in the team, or student is overconfident or underconfident. So that itself, plus the messages from each team, helps us to keep track of it, as in if there's any other gaming going behind, we could figure it out based on the messages and by monitoring attendance and participation in class. That's our checking way of checking whether it's the right thing. But that for our courses, it's the buddy check and the peer assessment factor that controls the pass and fail, because the students often get marked on the presentation plus the question and answer session for the entire team rather than one person.
Thank you. And staying on the same topic, there's some follow-up questions that have come through. If a student does fail, then what do you do after that?
It depends. It depends whether it's do they fail in the hurdle assessment or is it in the other assessments? If it's in the hurdle assessments, then we have got a series of steps to follow, which is already in the course instance, and we can't do anything too much. While if it's on the other assessments, we can certainly help them, provided that the team is okay with it. And we have got a big team component. So if it's caused by an issue in the team, then the student has to resolve the issue in the team before going into the other steps. That's something which we keep stubbornly strict, because this course is about teamwork mostly. It's not just about innovation and leadership. That innovation and leadership comes from teamwork. That is probably the biggest challenging thing which we have in the course, just to make sure that everybody is happy with each other. And yeah, the rest of the steps are based on how the team performs and how the team is interacting, because depending on the situation of the team, we may have to consider different options.
Did anyone else want to add to that one?
Yeah, so like HEMA, we basically, in the early oral interactive assessment, that's an opportunity in terms of identifying where the teamwork is not working. And so we do actually put a lot of effort into trying to intervene and use it as a performance development opportunity. We give students the opportunity to be able to work together to improve their performance through a structured intervention. And if they struggle to improve their performance, and then in the later interactive oral demonstrations still are not able to demonstrate their contributions to the project, it is a hurdle. And so at that point, the idea is that we've given a lot of opportunity for that hurdle to be met.
Great, thank you. I'm going to switch gears here and go to another question from our audience about assessor fatigue. So all of you are assessing a lot of students in a short period of time. Sometimes that time is restricted by just what you have available and not as much time as you would like. How do you manage assessor fatigue in how you scheduled the interactive oral assessments? I'll start with Andrew.
Well, speaking to the marking team about realistic expectations, how many they can fit in, they had the choice to mark the written proposal during revision week and then do the interactive oral assessment, which meant they could fit in more. So we talked about the limits, how many realistically they could do in an hour before they needed a break. If they're marking the proposal just before the interview, obviously you can then probably not do more than 3 in the hour. So they all we had these conversations before they made their availability known to the students, and the students booked in. So those are all things to think about before it's booked in and arranged. And I think it has to there will be fatigue if you're doing back-to-back interviews with no break. So I think it's worth talking about that. For the students, of course, they're just coming in for the assessment and then they leave. So it's an issue for the tutors and the markers in particular to talk about. So having flagged that beforehand, it wasn't raised as an issue. But yeah, I think it's important. Obviously, we want them completed in the 2-week exam period. So again, starting early, having the conversation early so people can make informed decisions about how they're going to spread it out. I put some examples and what I was going to do on a shared document. And that was a starting point for a conversation with tutors. Sometimes they initially thought, I'm going to get it over and done with quickly. And then they thought, actually, I'm not going to try and do them all in 4 days. I've got 2 weeks. I'm going to spread them out. So I think it's worthwhile, explicitly discussing that with the marking team.
Yeah. And David, how do you address assessor fatigue with your course?
Yeah, actually, I was hoping you'd ask this. So the team that I work with, the colleagues which I have who help to deliver this program, we all work in a very, very similar way. We're all very supportive of one another. The way that we do this is really down to scheduling. So we agree on the days during the exam period when we're going to run the oral assessments, and we block out the entire day or a series of days. It's typically 3 or 4 days that we block out of that week to do the oral assessments. The way that we schedule them is we'll do 2 an hour. So we'll have a 15-minute interview, a 5-minute kind of chat with the student when they join, just to let them know how it's going to go, and also to try and relax them, which we spoke about earlier. And then we'll have 10 minutes after that interview for us as the assessors to get up, to go and get a drink of water, to go and get a cup of tea, to stretch our legs and just kind of decompress a little bit, to take notes, whatever we need to do between the interviews. So it's a relatively relaxed cadence that we're working at as well, but the days are long. And that's kind of offset by the fact that all three of us who are doing this particularly enjoy this style of assessment. We enjoy the opportunity to talk to the students. We enjoy the opportunity. We enjoy discussing the topics with the students. We're not asking all of the students exactly the same questions or set of questions. As I said before, we've got a bank of questions. And so there's not, we're not repeating ourselves, constantly asking exactly the same thing over the course of the time that we're doing this. And then also the open-ended nature of the question allows us to stretch ourselves a little bit too, if we do need to. So yeah, it is. Yeah, I guess it's all about scheduling, and agreeing with the rest of the team who are doing this, what works with them and what they're comfortable with doing in terms of the time that per day that they commit to this.
Excellent. So the more planning you do, then hopefully the smoother it goes during the day, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now we've got just under 10 minutes left, so I'm going to start shifting into the wrap up. So I've got 2 questions left for everyone. I'll start with a quick fire for each of you. What is 1 or 2 benefits that you found in using an IOA in your course? Mashuda, you're first on my screen. I'll start with you.
Okay, so one of the major benefits that I saw of doing the IOA was really being able to identify the different levels of learning outcomes for each student within the team, and that gave us a very defined way to be able to adjust for level of contribution towards the team grade. Students actually did also really report in their in course evaluations that they found the opportunity to be able to explain their contribution really important, and they really felt that helped them with just the kind of overall concern around, well, if I do all the work, do I get all the marks and things, and
Yep.
so that that did help a lot in terms of the just kind of the perception of how grade is awarded for a team project. So yeah, I think that was really beneficial.
Thank you. Hema, what about you? What's one massive benefit you found in using the IOA?
When we started, it was more like if we do panel marking and IOAs, we'll get more consistency and the students will be happier with the interaction. That was our aim. But the unexpected benefit was that we realized that we had to have a very multidisciplinary panel. And when not just multidisciplinary, we were very conscious about not marking the performance of the students who present, because we have got students who communicate in diverse styles. And I think I also saw Gavin's question on the top about different cultural backgrounds and also accents and things. So what we did amazingly, without knowing anything, unintentionally, was our teaching team who was marking had different cultural backgrounds too. So that meant disciplinary backgrounds and cultural backgrounds the students started resonating more with that. They saw that their perspectives were more valued, and that also helped with the targeted question and answer sessions. And the students they felt like more heard during those sessions, and that was the best thing of IOA for us.
Fantastic. And Andrew, one benefit or unexpected benefit that you found?
I would say I was speaking to one of the course tutors, and she said, look, I had this student in the tutorial, very quiet student, who didn't speak all semester, and I really didn't know whether they'd understood anything. And then when we went to the IOA, they didn't stop talking. They had lots to say. and she was astounded that this person had been silent all semester. So I think a story like that shows that it's given created this opportunity that wasn't previously available for the students to voice their opinion and understanding and to show what they learnt. That makes it worthwhile for me.
Oh, that's amazing. And David.
Yeah, I guess 3 points. So first of all, I think it's more representative of a professional setting. I think that's a significant benefit for the students as well. It's a really good opportunity for us to interact with students, and all of us get a great deal of satisfaction about seeing how well students have progressed over the course of the semester, and this is it's just a good experience for us as well, I think. And then it's over quickly. Nobody particularly likes marking exams, I don't think. Once the oral assessment is done, and we've made our notes and conferred on the marks as well, it's done and dusted, and we don't need to mark exams, so there's a benefit to our side from that.
Thank you. And one last question for you all to wrap it up. Linking in with a question from the audience as well. Reflecting back on your time with interactive oral assessments that you've done, framing it as, if you were to give advice to a new course coordinator, what would you advise them? Or what would you do differently next time? And I'll ask you keep it to less than 1 minute each. Hima.
I think I would refine my rubrics a bit more just to make sure they are very pinpoint, because when we're doing long sessions, the fatigue hits. It's not easy to read large blocks of chunks of details in the rubrics. So I think I'm going to make it concise, and that would be easier for the students as well as for the tutors who are marking. That's my next step, and I would strongly suggest that we start doing that before we go into this.
Fantastic. Mashuda, what would you do differently or advise a new course coordinator to do?
Yeah, well, my advice would be really just to plan it meticulously, because planning is really key to being able to schedule, being key to the logistics, being able to kind of manage the sort of like expectations across different markers and everything. So I'd just say plan.
I love it. David, what about you? While David gets set up, Andrew, what would you do differently next time?
Like Mashuda, I think planning and preparing is important. So give yourself enough time, a semester if you can, to talk to people, think about how it's going to work. And related to that, thinking about how it fits in with your course learning objectives and the other assessment. What is it you're really trying to assess in the interactive learning assessment? So do that work, give yourself time to do that, and then it'll run more smoothly.
Thanks, Andrew. And David, back to you. What would you do differently next time, or advise a course coordinator to do if they were starting out with IOAs?
Yeah, thanks for coming back to me. I had battery problems. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, it's come up over the course of this discussion. Preparation, I think, is key. Make sure you're prepared for this. And the first time that we did this, we worked very dynamically as well. We're talking about what was working and what wasn't working while we ran through the first few interviews. And that really, really helped. So preparation and willing to be a little bit agile in terms of what you're doing when you're trying this out. I'm very happy to talk about my experiences. If anybody wants to sit down and discuss this as well, I'm very happy to share examples or talk through what it's been like to do this as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. And thank you to all of our panelists. So everyone, please join me in thanking Hima, Mashuda, David, and Andrew for joining us today for the panel. And we have a poll running, so please fill that out if you've got the time. A reminder that on the Padlet you can find a copy of the slides from today, some resources that myself and others have created, drawing on the knowledge of academics like our lovely panelists who have run IOAs, and we're continuously building on those and adapting them as needed. So if you have feedback, please let us know. The session is being recorded as well, so if you've missed any part you can go back to see it. And thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of Ready to Teach Week.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yes. Thanks so much, everybody. We got through most of the questions on the Padlet as well, so that was great. There were a lot of overlapping themes as well, which I was hoping would come out as well. So thank you very much.
For having us. That was a really good discussion, and nice to hear from everybody else who has experience of doing this too.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us, and yeah, that's been a great discussion. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.